I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
Greetings, fellow mortals. Just a reminder saying it's just my opinion is for cowards. How I Met Your Mother holds a special place in my heart. It is in no way the best show or even sitcom ever made. It is filled with flaws, plot holes, and terrible characters. Not terrible in the way that they're badly written or anything, but terrible in the way that very few of these people are actually good individuals that I would trust morally. In fact, I could argue that Marshall is in fact the only person in the entire show that could be considered moral from start to finish, even if he's not exactly perfect himself.
Oh, I forgot how bad it looks.
I've seen worse.
The reason I'm so fond of the show is that it ran through my childhood into my almost adulthood. There is an unconscious bias that I have to it. I tend to like it. Not all the jokes land, not all the storytelling and storylines make sense. Not every character is as equal to others in terms of quality. And I definitely do not agree with every single moral that is presented in the show. In many ways, How I Met Your Mother comes off more as a bridge between the 1990s and the 2010s, rather than a real commentary on the world that actually existed in the 2000s.
I can explain.
If you have somehow made it this far into the video and somehow don't know, How I Met Your Mother follows Ted Mosby. He is retelling the story of, well, how he met his wife to his 2 children over the course of like 9 seasons. Yes, 9 seasons. And I'm not talking streaming world 9 seasons. I am talking about real world pre-streaming 9 seasons where there was over 20 episodes per seasons. I am not making that up. He tells us the journey he took as a person and as a man to become ready to be in a relationship with the love of his life. And if you think about it, that's a really compelling setup in any time period. So much so that they tried it again with How I Met Your Father. Unfortunately, it never really caught on and I never really watched that show. It lasted about 2 seasons, so we see how that went.
Failure, you're still a failure.
What I always found interesting about the show, even when I was young, is that everything is told through the perspective of an older Ted Mosby. He is, in fact, an unreliable narrator. That means that as the storyteller, he is trying to manipulate his audience through lies, leaving out important facts, twisting details, and showing obvious bias. Perhaps even so much so that he cannot be relied upon as an accurate representative of what actually occurred during the events of this period of time, because he is trying to convince his kids and us as the audience of something from the very beginning, and looking back, it's not exactly subtle.
Does that make sense? Ladies and gentlemen, I am not making any sense. None of this makes sense.
Perhaps he's not even doing this maliciously. Most people don't have ironclad memories. They forget details and embellish aspects of the story. The old fish story trope. It's pretty obvious if you look back at the show. The fisherman's story about what he caught and how he caught it becomes more embellished as more time passes. This allows the story of How I Met Your Mother to become almost cartoony in certain aspects, especially when it comes to Barney.
So I am confusion. Why is this one Kansas, but this one is not Arkansas?
Barney Stinson, played by Neil Patrick Harris, becomes the heart and soul of the show. It would not work without him. He's the funniest, most flawed, most charismatic, most corrupt, and most heartfelt character in the entire show. And he does terrible things to trick women into sleeping with him. Except there is a problem. Almost all of these tales are being told by Ted, who is an unreliable narrator trying to convince his kids of something. Almost all of Barney's tales are retellings from an already embellishing Barney who told Ted and is probably embellishing even more of these stories to his own kids, meaning that the reality of what actually happened is far more absurd than what occurred in real life.
It's totally made up. Pure fiction. It's fiction. It's fiction.
And that is why How I Met Your Mother can get away with being so politically incorrect, immoral, and most of all, hilarious most of the time, because of the unreliable narrator trope. Because if Barney Stinson was a real person in real life, I probably would have popped him in the mouth the moment he started spouting his BS to me, even when I was a teenager. I would have treated him like I would treat Andrew Tate. No, in fact, lying to women to get them to sleep with you and do sexual favors is, in fact, not cool. Have you perhaps considered being fit, charismatic, have some riz, and be good in bed as a separate alternative in order to convince them to be with you? You know, like how it's supposed to be done?
I'm just saying.
But his and the rest of the group's antics are biased retellings of a man who is trying to remember what happened long ago before he became a father and had all of his brain power drained into that endeavor of his life. This unreliable narrator trope is what allows the show to work so well. That and, the performances. Each of the main characters are perfectly represented by the actors. Without their work, no one would have cared about these very flawed human beings who do in fact get better as the series progresses, admittedly, but the flaws are right there for you to see, and it's not really all that likable at the start sometimes.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care. Let me tell you something. We don't care. Jerry.
So through the lens of bias and through excellent acting, the audience does in fact grow to care enough about these characters to justify full 9 seasons of storytelling, which is super impressive to say the least, but that full 9 seasons led to a problem. Mostly being that a full decade passed from the beginning of How I Met Your Mother to the end of the series. A full decade of storytelling, changes, and unexpected character development happened, with the ending being set in stone long before the final episode aired.
That was the plan. Not a great plan.
Because Ted is telling this story to his children. Every scene with those teenagers was filmed in the same year. It is the biggest flaw of live action storytelling. The longer something goes on, the more changes you notice in the characters' physical appearances. This doesn't matter much for adult characters because almost every season is separated by at least a year. Of course, for 9 seasons, it gets a bit different, but I will get to that. The major exception is for the young actors who will drastically change over the course of 1 year. Puberty kind of hits people in the face like a truck going down the freeway at 120 miles per hour. A single year for a child or a teenager means a lot more differences than someone in adulthood. Yes, you can in fact tell the difference between decades when it comes to adults. Someone in their 20s looks far different than someone in their 30s or 40s, but a single year means a lot more to someone in the first decades of their life. You can really tell the difference. You can definitely see it. Just compare the difference between a 14-year-old to a 19-year-old and a 24-year-old to a 29-year-old. That is why the show had to be planned so far ahead and led to the troubles which appeared almost a decade after the show started. Everything was predetermined, so they were kind of stuck. I mean, it was either that or to just throw everything away. And by the way, spoilers ahead for the show that's been finished for over a decade at this point, if you care. But the ending was decided at the very beginning of the show because they had to film it that way. And as someone that has written stories and studied the art of storytelling his entire damn life, I do understand what they were going for. They wanted this not to actually be the story about how Ted met the mother. Instead, they wanted this to be the story of how he ultimately ended up with Robin despite everything after his wife passed away from an illness. And I see what they were going for, and it would have worked if it was, 2 to 3 seasons, but this was a decade and a lot of things changed.
That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
In retrospect, looking back at this as a fully grown adult man, this wasn't difficult to predict. The only reason I was surprised by this when I was younger was because I started this journey when I was about 8 years old. Back then, my dumb child brain took the title literally. How I Met Your Mother. I assumed that's what the show was. With the naive brain of a teenager and child, I assumed that this was about how Ted met the love of his life, because I've always been a hopeless romantic at heart. Just ask my wife. The moment I decided to go all in on dating her, I knew that I was going to marry her. As such, the show spoke to my most sensitive sensibilities.
You look lonely. I can fix that.
Not to say that I was perfect. I flirted, dated, and had consensual flings with people that I knew weren't going to be my wife, but I outright told them that they weren't going to be my wife when I either broke up with them or experienced those friends with benefits situations. Which stands in stark contrast to Ted Mosby, who claimed from the very beginning that he wanted to find the mother of his children and was obviously not ready at the start of the series, and that's where the problems really start. If you look at the beginning of How I Met Your Mother and most of his actions throughout the majority of the series, Ted Mosby is not actually a great guy at the start of all this. He pretends to be, but he's not really. There's a reason he hangs around with Barney. He's a boy pretending to be a helpless romantic, and this is presented by Robin, who is 100% honest about everything that she wants out of life, and he ignores every word that comes out of her mouth. Because everything she says includes the fact that she does not want children ever at any point in her life. But Ted still relentlessly pursues her from the very start of the series because he, for some god-forsaken reason, has got it in his head that he can change her mind, which is a terrible mindset to go into in any type of relationship.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
To be fair, I always say that the line between romantic and creepy is divided by whether or not the woman is open to the idea of your approach. When I first started dating my wife, she had experienced a nasty divorce and outright declared that she never wanted to be married again. But I knew that she would change her mind because I had never loved someone like I loved her. In that way, I'm very similar to Ted Mosby, except that I had a better choice at that time. I had a gut instinct that I could in fact change her mind because I didn't think she was being truthful. And you know what she said a year after dating me? Where is my ring?
This is quite a shock. On the other hand, it's not surprising in the least.
And then I got the ring a few months later. Sorry, I didn't want to step on my sister's toes, who was getting married around that time. I had to wait until after that was done. But that goes to show you the line. I view it as the difference between loving the idea of someone and actually loving them as a person and understanding what they actually want out of life. Based on the friendship I had with my wife before we even started dating, I understood that we had the same goals, desires, and outlooks on life for the most part. We disagreed on some things, but 90%, most of the important things, we were on the same page. Ted and Robin, on the other hand, were far different in that regard. You cannot really point to any single aspect of life and see that they agree on anything, really.
Whoa. Lois, this is not my Batman glass.
All of this isn't to say that Robin is a perfect person. It's far from the truth. She was not perfect, but she was in fact honest at the start of their relationship. She did not want kids. She didn't want a traditional lifestyle. She didn't want what Ted wanted out of life, and that is okay. Everyone is allowed to want what they want and be content with what they're content with in life, but the show was obsessed for some reason with Ted and Robin being together for the first couple of seasons, even though their goals couldn't have been more different. Not only that, religion, politics, and finances were not brought into the equation at all, because the writers had an ending in mind, because they weren't willing to and really couldn't stray from their already established path. Ted would ultimately ask his kids permission to date Robin after the mother had died. That is why he's an unreliable narrator. Everything was done in order to convince the kids and us as the audience that he should in fact end up with Robin, and you know what? He failed.
Well, that sucks.
Now, these scenes were filmed in 2005. The show ended in 2014. Do you see the problem here? We went from the middle of the Bush administration to the beginning of the Obama administration. That is a problem. Writers came and went from the show during that time period. Characters developed in ways that the writers really didn't expect at the beginning, especially with Neil Patrick Harris breathing life into Barney and making his romantic relationship the ultimate end goal of season 9, where the entire final season followed the weekend surrounding his wedding to Robin, only for the last 5 minutes to end with Robin and Ted together after decades later, because apparently Barney and Robin got divorced over like 5 minutes.
This is worthless.
It's less than worthless, my boy.
9 seasons, 208 episodes, close to a decade of storytelling. That is what separated the beginning from the planned ending. If you've never written anything before, I can assure you that your plans for the ending that you made at the beginning of writing anything, even a short story, will change over the course of the writing process. Why? Because characters take a life of their own, making choices that you didn't originally anticipate. Plans change. Life throws a wrench into your plans. That is how it is, and there's no way to get around it. No matter how well you plan everything in a storytelling, you have to be willing to adapt, especially when the pre-planned ending no longer fits with the narrative that you're trying to create.
Over and over and over and over and over.
Okay, Clay, I get the point.
No, you don't!
Ultimately, by the end of season 9, which was once again entirely focused around the wedding of Barney and Robin, everything had changed from the beginning. The writers, the characters, and even the actors involved were not the same people who were involved at the start of the project. Everything had changed. They were an entirely new decade at that point, for the love of God. Let's say that How I Met Your Mother only lasted 2 to 3 seasons, like How I Met Your Father did. Ending how you originally planned made perfect sense. But a decade later, where Barney and Robin became better people in order to be together, and the audience was dedicated to that and invested in that, well, there's only one thing that you can say about that. You can say that...
Well, this sucks.
The story had shifted, the world had shifted, the time period had shifted, even the people involved had shifted. In all honesty, the original series should have pivoted, abandoning the original plan in order for a new ending, kind of like how Game of Thrones should have done. After all, the entire arc became about Ted needing to let go about the idea of Robin in order to be ready for the love of his life and for the mother of his children. Barney and Robin should have ended up together, spending years upon years together without having any children, and it should have been difficult, but they should have made it work because they loved each other. And then Ted does a speech to his kids about how they needed to embrace who they actually were and what they actually wanted in order to eventually be the person they needed to be to find who they're meant to be with.
Oh my God. I get it.
And I do understand the position that the writers were in. They were given the end goal, while most of them probably weren't involved at the very start. Most of the original writers probably didn't stick around through the majority of the series. In retrospect, the plan was obvious if you paid attention. Robin was at the center of Ted's story at the very start. The writers obviously planned for them to end up together. The only problem was the 7 other entire seasons which happened between these 2 seasons, between season 1 and season 9. That is a lot of time which passed between them. A lot of things changed.
But wait! There's more!
Obviously, sitcoms are meant to last as long as conceivably possible. The will they, won't they dynamic is the key, except the story shifted into Ted becoming the man he needed to be in order to meet the mother. Without these seasons, these 7 full seasons worth of storytelling, Ted wouldn't have been the man who Tracey needed him to be in order to start their relationship. The key was to pivot to this new conclusion that you've been writing to for the past 7 seasons, leaving the original ending as a what if extra for fans who wanted to know more, because the writing became about how Ted needed to let go of what he thought his life was going to be or should be instead of what it was actually meant to be.
First, let's get one thing straight. I'm not crying. I'm just sweating through my eyes.
This is a demonstration of holding on to the predetermined ending too intensely. There are 2 brands of writing, vaguely designated as pantsing versus planning, meaning writing by the seat of your pants or planning very, very far ahead in almost excruciating detail. From an outside perspective, planning seems like the better alternative overall. After all, if you try to write anything without any sort of plan, you're probably going to fall on your face and embarrass yourself. Except that's not always the case. Writers always need to be willing to shift their ideas in order to best fit where the story is growing towards instead of sticking to their predetermined conceptions, because sometimes it just gets out of your hands. It evolves into something you never thought it would be, and you have to be willing to accept that.
Pivot! Pivot! Pivot!
The ending really shouldn't have been all that difficult. Barney and Robin got married, and they stayed married. They didn't have any children. They were happy despite all the hardships that they faced because of their own previous wounds, romantically and emotionally, but they got through it together. And then Ted and Tracey get married. We see a montage of all of the characters' lives. They're happy, and then Ted ends with saying, "And that, kids, is how I met your mother." Roll credits. It is not that hard. Instead, people are still debating to this day, 12 years later, about whether or not the ending was correct, because it did not fit the story that they were trying to tell overall. That is why planning isn't always the be-all, end-all when it comes to storytelling. This isn't a science experiment. Writing is where the artistic mind meets the reality of art in terms of a science.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Writing is combining previously established tropes into one coherent story, but you have to do so uniquely in different ways, creatively. Writers need to be able to pivot with how the story evolves. And I can't tell you who was responsible for the near dogmatic desire to keep the original ending. It could have been executives behind the scenes, showrunners, the original writers, the network, the actors campaigning, or a combination of all these different groups. One look at the series at the end of season 8 should have told everyone involved that it was time to pivot, that Ted should not have ended up with Robin in any conceivable way. That was not the story they were trying to tell anymore. Not to say that people can't find romance after children or after divorces. That is not what I'm trying to say. Just look at my own marriage.
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
No, that's possible, but not with the way that they were telling How I Met Your Mother. This is simply based off of the 9 seasons of Ted desperately holding on to the idea of Robin and stringing along the other romantic relationships in his life. By the end, it led up to the mother. Barney and Robin were not built up to the divorce. They were built up to the end. They were supposed to stay together. Ted and Robin's ultimate relationship felt forced at the end because the entire final season was about the wedding and Ted letting go. It was about the fact that sometimes what you have in your head, this idea of someone and some future, will not work out. And when it is proven that it is over, it is over. It's time to let go. Sometimes that's just fine. That's just life. And you just have to accept that so that you can move on to what you actually need. And then all of that was thrown away in the final few minutes of the series. Yeah, I love that.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa.
That's too damn bad! You keep digging!
Is How I Met Your Mother bad? No. Does the ending ruin everything that came before it, like with Game of Thrones? No, far from it. Through the use of the unreliable narrator and demonstrating the steady growth of characters over the course of a decade, we're able to see how characters evolve through the reality of life. The problem was when the Word of God decided that this natural evolution and the development of people becoming better was wrong to end up in certain ships thrown together in the course of 10 minutes rather than 10 years of storytelling. That was ultimately the problem, that it did not end how it was supposed to end. It was forced. Do not force the ending. Let it breathe. Let it be natural. You pivot. Pivot.
Which raises a pertinent question. What is taking so long?
In all honesty, the show should have ended with everyone being happy. Marshall and Lily with their kids. Ted and Tracey with their kids. Barney and Robin without their kids, which is fine, obviously. And they all should have been in a giant picture together, happy with their families as aunts and uncles to each other, and everyone's just giant cousins. And then Ted happily declares to his kids, yes, that is how I met your mother. But the hardships of live action aging and development made such a conclusion impossible with Ted's kids. Which once again leads to the question as to why people are so insistent for everything to be live action when there are currently 2 to 3 years between seasons of most shows, which are meant to be 10 seasons altogether. It is not going to work out. Maybe, I don't know, just have Ted talk to animated versions of his kids. So that way, I don't know, you can write the story however it develops as it grows.
Stupid is, stupid does, Mrs. Blue.
I guess.
Ultimately, I wouldn't say that How I Met Your Mother is bad. In fact, I wouldn't even say the ending is completely terrible, although most people have retconned it in their heads. I still love the show to this day, but it is the ultimate lesson that sometimes planning isn't always the absolute good. Sometimes writers need to change the conclusion in order to fit the narrative that they're developing. It reminds me of the bathroom that I just had remodeled. There were problems. There was going to be a pipe in the exterior wall. The plumber pointed it out. We had to change a significant number of things, but then it prevented a pipe from busting during this terrible winter. So that's why you need to pivot. And to be fair, the writers should have been given proper room to pivot by the people in charge. I don't know who the final say really belonged to. Like all aspects of life, the reality of this situation exists in the middle. Have the story planned out, but be willing to allow it to develop past the original vision into something new. Change it as need be. Sometimes it doesn't have to all be picture perfect. Storytelling reflects life. Life is not perfect. Sometimes you need to make drastic changes immediately or based off of what you've seen prior. That is fine. And that is why How I Met Your Mother should have just changed. It should have just had a little bit of a different ending. Just 5 minutes worth of just voiceovers. It would have been fine. But what do you think? Did you like the ending of How I Met Your Mother? Do you think that I'm right in how they should have changed things? Did you want it to be exactly the way that it did? Did you see that coming? Please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And remember, if you disagree with everything I have to say, that is perfectly fine. After all, everyone is entitled to their objectively wrong opinion.
Disappointed!
Thank you all so much for watching.
You're still here? Good night, everybody.
Thank you. You bye. Boom.
Do not despair.